It's a big deal. You're moving all those boxes around, right? All those huge boxes, all that stuff you have to pack. It's amazing how many things you have. But so my parents decided to move everything they had and move the Salinas into a home. So that day I remember we pulled over in the morning. It was late in the morning, and we started to unpack our first load of boxes. And I remember just kind of looking up at the sky, and I remember just seeing these beautiful cumulus puffy clouds. But I didn't think much about it back then, because I didn't know anything about the weather, right? So I saw clouds that looked just like this, just like that in our sky. Not a big deal. I looked up and thought, those are pretty cool, right? But didn't think much about it. I was more worried about moving. And as the day went along, I noticed these clouds started to build somewhat and started to thicken up. And some of them started to even build on top of each other, which I thought was really interesting. But like I said, I didn't know much about the weather at that time. And so I thought, well, you know, I think it's interesting, but it didn't mean that much to me. And then that night, something happened that changed my life for the rest of my life. That night, all of a sudden it started to rain, and then we had a gigantic electrical storm. And that was the very first night that we moved into our new place. And I'll never, ever forget, because the lightning started coming down all over the place. Everywhere it was coming down, and you could hear that loud rumble of thunder just shaking the windows. It was so loud and so close, the sound was actually shaking the windows. And I remember it sounded like people were dragging furniture around in the house every time you'd hear the rumble of the thunder. And my brother and I sat at that front window looking out at all these lightning bolts coming down. And I was just amazed. I mean, I was really fascinated. And then all of a sudden, way back when, we had metal trash cans. We don't see very many of those anymore. But we had some metal trash cans. Metal is a good conductor of electricity. All of a sudden, there was a big flash of lightning at the end of the street, and I watched this big bolt come down and hit this trash can at the end of the street. And at the same time, you could hear that clap of the thunder. That's when you know that lightning is very, very close, is when you hear the thunder clap at the same time. And it just, boom, 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 shook the whole house. And I was amazed, and I sat there in awe. I thought, that is incredible. And then you know what? I remember we stayed up as late as I could. I remember finally just falling asleep that night. I don't know when it was, but I remember just being so amazed at how awesome the weather was and how incredible it was to watch. And that next day and thereafter, I started to try and learn more about the weather. And then soon it became my passion and my love, and I started doing some crazy things. I'm only 7.5, and I realized there's a special, I look and there used to be a little a TV guide, and it showed that there used to be a show called AM Weather, but it started at 6:30 in the morning, which was earlier than I would normally get up. But I started to make myself get up at 6:30 in the morning every day and get up and watch this weather show, because I thought it was interesting. And I remember I even wrote into them, and I asked if they would send me some weather symbols and some cloud charts. And they sent me some of these wonderful things. I still have that cloud chart at home that they sent me a long time ago. And that's when I started to fall in love with the weather. And then my parents started to notice that I was getting a little crazy about the weather, right? And so when I was 8 years old, they, for one of my birthdays, bought me my own weather station. Oh yeah, I got my own weather station. That means I had a barometer, I had a thermometer, a hygrometer. Anybody know what a hygrometer is? Hygrometer? Yeah, anybody want to take a guess? We know a thermometer measures what? Temperature. A barometer measures what? Not wind speed. Pressure. And an anemometer measures what? Wind speed. A hygrometer measures the amount of moisture in the air, right? The amount of moisture in the atmosphere, right? So anyway, I had this new wonderful weather station, and I was so excited to get it, because now I was finally going to be able to study the weather. And so I remember my father had his camera store. My mother worked at a bank. And so my brother would babysit me in the afternoons. So they were both, my parents were both gone one day, and I had this brand new weather station. I said, I gotta set this thing up. So I set up my thermometer, I set up my hygrometer, everything set up inside the household. That was pretty easy. But then I looked and I saw, oh, I've got the anemometer. I've got to put that anemometer up somewhere. We've got to measure the wind. But in order to measure the wind, I kind of need a nice clear space. Where could I get a place where I would have an unobstructed place where we could really get the wind speed? And in my mind, you know what I thought? Exactly. I thought, we'll put that on the chimney, right? So